In episode 7, Jimmy arrives back at the house after the fight, and he fills Eddie in on everything that happened. Jack is not doing well. He's in a coma. As soon as Eddie hears about this, he wants to go to Susie's house and make sure that she's okay. But Jimmy explains, Susie's house is a secret. I'm not really supposed to tell you. Although, since it's Jimmy, he does end up giving the address up. And when Eddie heads over there, he is greeted by a different Susie Glass. One that is not messing around, that is all business, and that is pissed off and not interested in getting any help from Eddie. After all, she says, you wanted out, remember? And the truth is, she doesn't need Eddie's help. She goes on the warpath, making those that were responsible for this pay. She ends up killing the fighter. She gets the referee. The only person she doesn't get is Collins. She's waiting to extract revenge on him. But before she can do that, she gets called to a meeting with her father because her father is also aware of what she's doing, and he does not approve. She's killing people in broad daylight. It's not a good look. Bobby's worried that now Collins knows that she's coming. The element of surprise is out the window. So he tells her, you need to stand down. I've got people that can take care of this, and you're not it. He basically orders her to go home and lay low. While Susie was meeting with her father, Eddie was meeting with Stanley Johnston's right-hand man to let him know that because of what happened with Jack, circumstances have changed and now he's reluctant to negotiate without the Glass family knowing about it. And the second in command tells Eddie that he also heard about what happened with Jack and he feels horrible about it. He tells him that he doesn't condone anything that Collins did. Violence and trickery, they don't have a place in the game. He does, though, have an offer that's mutually beneficial and ends peacefully. He tells Eddie that he knows that Eddie's house is one of a few houses. What he needs is for Eddie to get the names of those 13 locations because that will give Stanley Johnston leverage to negotiate with Bobby Glass in order to take over the business. Eddie tells him that he'll get to work on it, and when he arrives back home, he's got a big surprise. Charlie has returned home and she is pregnant. She didn't tell anybody. Everybody's thrilled for her, especially Jeff. And that's because, yes, Jeff is, in fact, her father. Although, Charlie doesn't know that. Once the congratulations are over and Charlie leaves the room, Eddie asks his mother for help with the matter of getting the list of names. While she doesn't have the names, she gives Eddie a person who probably would have the names. The guy's name's Tibbsy. Both Eddie and Freddie head over there because Freddie actually knows the guy a little bit. But once they get into the mansion, it's not what it seemed like. It's been overtaken by thugs and criminals. Tibbsy is basically relegated to one room in the house. Once Freddie, Eddie, and Tibbsy get alone, Tibbsy explains that he had a run-in with the Glass family that didn't end well. They didn't renew the contract, and because he needed the income, he went to somebody else, which, well, those other people have taken over the location, and they're not as nice as the Glass family. The good news is when Eddie explains the reason for them dropping in, Tibbsy has kept meticulous notes. He keeps a diary. He hands it over to Eddie, but when they go to leave, the thugs enter the room and they want the diary. They want everything. They tell Eddie that because it's in the house, they now own it. Eddie could probably take most of these guys, but he doesn't feel like getting into a violent scrum at the moment. So, in a way, he sort of allows them to shake him down for a watch and Freddie's pants, which is an embarrassing look as the two head out. As the two are leaving, they get into an argument. And it's during this argument that Freddie admits to Eddie he sort of implied to Susie Glass that if she were to get rid of Eddie, he would take over and allow the Glass family to stay on the property. He tells him this because he genuinely feels bad about it. But this admission by Freddie doesn't come with immediate forgiveness from Eddie. He's very angry. He tells his older brother that he's been a disappointment his entire life, and his entire life he's had to clean up his mess. And if they don't get out from under the Glass family, then what happened to Tibbsy will likely happen to them. Eddie and Freddie then get in the car. They drive back to the house where Susie Glass is waiting for Eddie. She was in her apartment just as her dad told her to when she got an interesting phone call from Collins. Collins all but admits that he's working for somebody else. He's waiting for the okay to go after her. Now, Collins sent her a message through her delivery service for food, which means that he knows where she lives. This is now the second person in as many days to pay her a visit when her location is supposed to be a secret. So she's come to the house looking for answers from Eddie as to how he got her address. Eddie has to give up Jimmy's name, and when they confront Jimmy about it, he explains that he didn't give her address to Collins, but the way he got her address was through her Amazon account. Susie then asks Jimmy if anybody's been asking about her, and he says, yeah, actually, that girl that you thought stole our van, Gabrielle. It takes a bit of prodding, but eventually Jimmy admits that he gave Gabrielle her home address because Gabrielle apparently wanted to send Susie flowers after what happened to Jack. When both Eddie and Susie hear about this, they demand that Jimmy set up a meeting with Gabrielle at their usual spot so that they can get answers from her directly. He does it, and when Gabrielle shows up, she's pretty taken aback. She wasn't expecting this. She definitely doesn't want to talk at all. And it takes threatening Jimmy's life to get her to admit that the person who hired her wasn't Collins. It was Stanley Johnston. She spills the beans on everything. She was hired $20,000 to steal a van for a guy that she had never met who ends up being Stanley Johnston's right-hand man. They then threatened to kill her if she didn't cozy up to Jimmy, and once they found out that she had an in, they made her get as much information as possible from him. She goes on to tell him that it was Stanley Johnston who slowed down the exporting of the weed. After his inside man, Keith, was killed, Stanley had to turn somewhere else, and that's when he turned to Collins. That, however, ended up being a bad move because the plan was never to put Jack in a coma. Collins just went too far. Susie believes this entire story because it checks out. And if Stanley Johnston were to get all the estates, he'd be the biggest supplier in the world. Before they can deal with Stanley Johnston, though, they have to deal with Collins first. And in order to get to Collins, they're going to use Gabrielle. Right before she breaks off the conversation, she makes Eddie assure her that he's with her. And he says he is, but it's not overly convincing. At least not with what we know. With Eddie assuring her, though, she goes into plan 2, which is making Gabrielle work for her. She tells Gabrielle to text Stanley Johnston the location of where Jack is being treated, although it's a fake location. It's not the right floor. They're setting Collins up. And that's exactly what happens. They completely set him up. They catch him off guard. But with Collins staring down the barrel of Susie Glass's gun, he drops a bombshell on her. He tells her that Stanley Johnston can corrupt anybody. He's even got Eddie under his thumb. And yeah, that's what it looks like, but it's not. Eddie did hand over a list of names to Stanley Johnston's right-hand man, but after doing so, he headed to meet with Bobby Glass, and he told him everything. How he was actively helping Stanley Johnston acquire his business, which was really peculiar to Bobby Glass. I mean, why would Eddie show up and tell him this? And he says, so you're screwing me over twice? But Eddie says, no, not quite. The thing is, Eddie didn't get a chance to explain his grand plan to Susie. And once Susie hears that Eddie is reportedly working for Stanley Johnston, she wants that taste of revenge again. So when she gets home, she calls up the gospel, and she tells him, I know what actually happened to your brother.
Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.